Good morning everyone, welcome to Our Small Footprint. My name is Nyssa, and if you're new here, we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. Today's video is a bit of a catch-up, so it's food related, but it's Christmas food related, because I just got a bit behind and haven't got this up yet, but I still want to share it. You'll have to excuse one of the guinea fowl is on a little mound behind me calling for the rest of them. Obviously they got split up and has been standing behind me and calling for the last 10 minutes, and I've kept on holding off starting, but I need to get this done, so you'll have to excuse the guinea fowl penguin in the background there. So today's video is, yes, cooking related, but it's old stuff, like a week old, because I didn't get to it. So this is our Christmas cookies. So we did gingerbread cookies and our potato salad. So I wanted to share, but I'm just sharing a little bit late. It would have been nice to have shared it more at Christmas time, but everything got away from me over Christmas, so I'm sharing it now. So enjoy watching, and I will see you on the next video whenever I manage to get it sorted. Alright, bye guys. Okay, so the gingerbread recipe that we did was dairy-free. We used coconut oil instead of any sort of butter or anything. And I used the naturally sweet brown sugar mix to try. So I got gifted a whole bunch of naturally sweet products to try and, you know, share as I'm using them. And we've been using a range of them for a bunch of different things over Christmas, because there's so much eaten over Christmas that we don't normally eat in large quantities, that I thought using the sugar alternatives would be a really good time to do it. So I used the naturally sweet brown sugar in this. It tasted just like brown sugar. This one was I quite like the brown sugar mix on this. It's quite good. So I used coconut oil, and we used powdered spices in them. I brought it all together in the Thermix. Well, Sonnet did the first batch, brought it all together in the Thermix, and then we kneaded it. It seemed a little crumbly, a little bit dry. It didn't feel quite right, but I have no idea where the recipe for the dairy-free gingerbread that I sort of mastered last year, because I made like 3 or 4 batches of it last year, and there's footage of it too. But I don't know, I actually didn't go back to see if I put the recipe in the comments, mind you, maybe I did, but I have no idea where I wrote it down. So that just sort of pushes me to get this whole website going with the recipes on it too, is to try and have somewhere that I can have these centralized recipes that I can adapt each year. But anyway, when we were rolling it out, it definitely seemed a little bit crumbly, but I didn't want to play with it too much, because it's not always what it's like then isn't how it's always like once you've refrigerated it, because we always refrigerate it post making the dough to make it a little bit easier to roll out. So it was done there. Apollo wanted to make a batch as well, so I went ahead and let him make a second batch. You can never have too many gingerbread cookies, everyone will eat them, though of course because we didn't have mum visiting, we did have less people eating them, but you still can never have too many gingerbread cookies at Christmas time. So I let him make a batch up as well and roll it out. And then they go in the fridge to chill before we do anything with it. So we made the 2 batches of dough up, and then once they were done, we covered them in, put them in bowls with lids on, and put them in the fridge to chill before we went on to the next step. They chilled for a couple of hours, only really need to go for 45 minutes or so, but we didn't get to it until later. I had other stuff that I was doing. So we chilled them in the fridge for a couple of hours, and then the kids had a go at it. So we used some baking paper. As I said, the dough just wasn't quite right. It was a little bit soft, a little bit crumbly, but it was a really hot day as well. But it worked fine for what they were doing. So we rolled it out. We used some baking paper as needed to help with getting it rolled out nice and thin, though I let the kids do what they wanted to do. So there was some thickness issues in some spots. The shapes that they were cutting out were all different sizes as well. But you know, it was what it was, and the whole point of this was that the kids got to do it. So they just did what they wanted, and this is, I'll just leave a little bit of footage here with some music for you to see them going at it. They eventually lost interest, as they do. We've had a few issues with that this year, things that I've set up, craft activities or cooking activities, and they just haven't seen them all the way through, and it's somewhat frustrating doing the work to set it all up, but at the same time, kids and all that. So once they'd had enough, we still had plenty of dough left, so all I did was rolled it into logs and cut it into discs. And actually, when I make this dough again, it might be what I do, like I might do this outside of Christmas, because we really enjoyed the biscuits. The biscuits were really nice. So I might just chill them into logs and cut discs off them and cook them as discs for just eating with coffee and things like that. So that worked anyway. I rolled it up into logs, cut it into discs so that I could cool. Once they were baked and cooled, and I did them on the barbecue to cook them like I do most things, and it was quite time consuming. It only takes about 8 to 10 minutes per tray, but of course with the different thicknesses and sizes that varied. But I can only fit one half cookie sheet and one quarter cookie sheet in the barbecue, so I had to keep on rotating them around and watching the temperatures and things like that. But so we cooked them all in the barbecue in batches. Once they were done and they were cooled, I mixed up some icing. So again, I'm using the naturally sweet products here to give them a go, and they had a xylitol based icing sugar. Again, a disclaimer here, xylitol is poisonous to dogs. Make sure that your dogs don't have access to it or anything cooked with it. Mixed up the xylitol icing sugar with some gel colors and a little water. So last year we did normal icing, like thick sort of icing, and then I coloured it, but the biscuits ended up being more icing than biscuit and completely unnecessary. So this year what I did was I made it really thin, and then I bought these little food paintbrushes that they could use. So I mixed all the colours up with the paintbrushes. I mixed 6 colours up. I think the box had 12 colours. I thought 6 was plenty. And made them fairly thin, thick enough to go on the paintbrush, but fairly thin, and mixed them all with the paintbrushes, and then let the kids go. So the colours definitely weren't as vivid as the thicker icing sugar because there was less layers that soaked into the biscuits a little bit, and the biscuits were gingerbread, not sugar cookies, so you're starting on a brown background as well. But it was plenty of colour. The kids enjoyed using the paintbrushes to paint things in and make patterns and like stripy candy canes and all that sort of stuff, and it worked quite well. I think it was a good idea. I think that the way it worked meant that there was less icing wasted, less icing on the biscuits, and made the biscuits more edible because of that. It wasn't as sweet because there was less on there. The xylitol tasted fine in that quantity too. I don't know that I'd like it in a thicker buttercream type icing, but in the thin layer over the biscuits it was perfectly fine. It tasted very pleasant, and the icing sort of soaked into the biscuit, so it didn't set hard or anything like the icing that I would normally use. It just sort of blended into the biscuit, which may have made the biscuits a little bit more soft too, but the biscuits were really lovely and soft and edible. I think that actually these biscuits would probably work really well for those ice cream sandwiches I was making. So if I rolled it into a log and then sliced it up and baked them in the circles and then put the ice cream in between, I think that would probably work out really well. So all in all, the biscuit making was fun for the kids. Everything got eaten because the biscuits were very nice, and the icing worked well with the paintbrushes and the colours. They got to use all different colours instead of me just making a couple, and they got to paint them all over however they wanted with the biscuits. They did get board of it. I did paint some myself and some were left blank, and that's fine, but the whole concept worked out quite well. So that was Christmas Eve that we did those, so that they could have them with hot chocolate and stuff for Christmas Eve. We did potato salad on Christmas Day, and I wanted to share my potato salad because I had a couple of questions about it. But we also had our potatoes to use. So my potato salad is fairly simple, but super tasty. We really enjoy it. So first up, I boil eggs. Now, I just washed and float tested 24 odd eggs, so I stuck them in water to make sure that they didn't float, because when you're boiling them, obviously you can't check them before you cook them, so you want to make sure that they're nice and fresh. So I wanted to make sure that all the eggs that I was using were ones that were floating horizontal on the bottom of the water, to make sure, not floating, sinking and sitting horizontally in contact with the bottom of the dish in the float test, and then I put them in the water to boil, and I scrubbed them as well, obviously, because we're using them in boiled eggs. I like to bring my water up to a boil, so I put all the eggs in there, cover them in water, bring the water up to a boil, and once the water is at a boil, then I time them for 4 minutes and turn it off. At the end of the 4 minutes, I turn it off, and then I transfer them into cold water. I used our homegrown potatoes. I used the tiny ones that needed to be used that had no scab on them, and I scrubbed them with a veggie brush. Nice and time consuming considering they were small potatoes, but worth the effort. I don't like to peel, and peeling little tiny potatoes is a lot of work, and you make a lot of wastage too. So I just scrubbed them with a veggie brush and made sure I was using ones that didn't have any scab on them, and then boiled them. They probably would have been nicer if they were steamed, but I don't have anything big enough to steam them in, so I just boiled them, and that's fine. I just filled the pot with as many as would fit and stuck them on to boil. I made the dressing, or the mayo, potato salad cream, whatever you want to call it, and I do that with the duck egg yolks. So I start off basically making a mayo. So I've got duck egg yolks in there. I used some of the fermented mustard, some of the fermented garlic and honey, the cloves from the fermented garlic and honey, and some lemon juice, and brought it together. Then I slowly add olive oil till it's the right consistency. So it starts off thin, keep on adding olive oil till it emulsifies and gets nice and thick. I didn't want it overly thick though, because it's used as a dressing here, not as a spread. Now, my favourite cordless stick blender died the other day, which isn't surprising because I've had it for 4.5 years now, and it was secondhand from Mum prior to that. But I got Darryl to buy me a cheap Big W one when he went into Toowoomba for his appointment to use in the meantime, and it's working fine. It just sucks because it has to be plugged in, and the way it works too is that I can't run it and let go of the jug that it's in. It just spins the jug. So, but it's working fine. So I didn't want it too thick because it's going on as a dressing. Once I got it to the point that I wanted it, I poured it into a bowl to taste test and add anything to it. So once I got it in the bowl, I added a little bit more of the mustard, and that will give the mustard texture in it too now because it's not being blended again. I added some salt. I decided to add some of the bacon seasoning that I buy because it would give it like a nice sort of a smoky undertone, and I really like the bacon seasoning on it, and some more lemon juice, and just mixed it all up and tasted it until it was how I wanted it to be. Once the potatoes were fork tender, I drained them and chopped them up. Now, we like our potatoes fairly soft for a potato salad. Like, some people like it quite firm, but we like ours to break down a little bit because we like that texture of it. So these are quite soft, and the smaller ones obviously are softer than the larger ones too. The whole varied size thing doesn't help with getting them to the same consistency. Any that had a bit of skin that was a bit tough or anything like that, I just discarded, but most of the skin we leave on there because we quite like the colour, the flavour, texture going in there as well. I quartered and eighths all the boiled eggs as well. So we chop up all the potatoes, put all the eggs in there as well. I cooked off some bacon into bits and dumped that in there as well. You can add a little bit of onion if you want. You could add a bit of celery, a bit of corn, anything like that. But we're sticking with the very basics today. You could put spring onions on it too, would be quite nice. Added the dressing to it and stirred it through. We really like to do this Christmas Day and serve it warm for Christmas, with Christmas lunch, with ham and prawns and whatever we happen to be having that day. And then it goes in the fridge and we eat it cold for the next 3-4 days, however long it lasts. And that's sort of why we do such a big batch, because it's good for lunch and breakfast for the next few days with any of the leftover ham and things like that. So that is how we do our potato salad. So a slightly less informative video today, and more just sharing some of the things that we do for Christmas and letting you see the kids do the biscuits, which they really enjoy. And it gives me, each year, if I take footage of the kids decorating biscuits, I think that'll be really neat for me to have a look over the years as well. And maybe I'll put it together at some point when they're all too big to want to do Christmas cookies with me, and or maybe they'll get to the point where they're actually doing it with me rather than just, you know, going, well, we want cookies, and, you know, yeah, anyway. That's Christmas with children, isn't it? It's the theory is fun, practice not so much. But so thanks for joining me again today, and I will see you again next time. Bye, guys.